Tell me about your book. You got a copy of it right here? You can show the camera and tell us a little bit. Tell us about it. Tell us about the motivation to write it. What's it about?
This is actually this book is the product of a larger writing project that I'm still in the middle of. Okay, so interesting story how this came about. When I left Sherman College, one of the things the board of Sherman College said that I was leaving the college in order to go write a philosophy book. That's the reason I was leaving. That's not necessarily the whole story, but that'll do. So I left Sherman College with an obligation or the thought that I would have the time to go write a book on chiropractic philosophy because I've been working on it for 20 years. So I've got some ideas about it. Well, the next thing I did was go out to work at Palmer. And when I went out to Palmer at Guy Riekman's request, come out here and teach chiropractic philosophy for us, teach the principles. When I went to Palmer, Guy had made a commitment that said, we will teach the 33 principles. We will bring the 33 principles back to the forefront in a Palmer curriculum. That's fine. That was his, before I even got there, when he took over as president in '97. That's what he said. And Joe Felicia had taught the principles for a couple of years there. Joe Felicia left, and Guy brought me out. And so his charge to me was, make sure they know the principles. Well, my experience was, at Sherman, I was making sure they understood the philosophy. At Palmer, the charge was, make sure they know the principles. Those aren't the same thing technically, unless the principles are the best possible way you can know the philosophy. So I said, okay, I'm at Palmer, I'm working for Guy Riekman, he wants me to make sure they know the principles. I will start using the 33 principles as my outline to teach chiropractic philosophy, because that's what I'm being asked to do. That's where what I was teaching at Sherman came from. I just wasn't using that as the outline. I've been teaching Sherman chiropractic's principles since 1981. But it was an interesting experiment, because as soon as I said, okay, now I have to teach chiropractic philosophy using these principles, I quickly noticed that the principles aren't the most perfect of logical arguments. So I started 3 times a year, because Palmer's on trimester systems, going through the principles to elaborate this argument. Well, I did that for several years and began to say, okay, I think there's great meat in these principles, but the dressing's not the best. They are not, in fact, the best in the best order. Some of the words that Stevenson's used are no longer very meaningful or mean different things. Some of the places where he says everything's this way, he really only meant some things are this way. All and nothing are hard words to use in philosophy. And so as I taught it at Palmer, I realized that I could actually start working with those principles and do real philosophy. As a person who had taught philosophy, but I'm not a trained philosopher, but teaching philosophy gets you thinking philosophically. I understand the method of philosophy enough to say, if this is my logical argument, Stevenson's 33 principles, could I make it a better argument? Could I make it so that it's easier to understand, so that the principles say what the argument is trying to communicate more clearly? Well, the answer is yes, you can. And so the first thing I did was take the principles and say, okay, just because they're Stevenson's, so what? Stevenson's is Stevenson's, I'll leave it alone. But taking this same set of 33 statements, could I rearrange them, edit them, change them in any way, make them clearer, honor Stevenson's? I'm not trying to make them say something different than they're trying to say. Could I make them say what they say better? This book is the product of that motivation. This book contains Stevenson's 33 principles, but they're in a different order than they are in Stevenson's text, and some of the words have been changed to make them clearer, more concise, better explain what chiropractic's concept of the fact that we seem to live in a conscious universe rather than an unconscious mechanistic universe, what it means. And so when I did the intellectual work of thinking about how the principles should fit together at Palmer. Then I left Palmer in 2006 and came out here. When I was at Palmer, I was being the vice president for international affairs and a teacher full-time, and I didn't really have time to write this book that I thought up. When I got here, one of the privileges that Dr. Rickman and Dr. Scott gave me, as a full-time faculty member, I have the time to do this, and it's appropriate work because it's just pure scholarship, write what I've developed. So I spent the first couple of years here writing this part of it. It's only the first book, because at the same time I said, if I can take Stevenson's 33 principles and rearrange them, there's still 33 of them, they're in a little different order, the words are changed, could I actually update them? Could I trim them down? Could I make them more economical? Could I make them say exactly what they need to say instead of just hint at what they need to say? Which is more philosophic work, and I've already done that work, and I'm in the process of writing up my second volume, which is going to be called Contemporary Chiropractic Philosophy. This is called Contemporary Chiropractic Philosophy, an Introduction, because it talks about updating Stevenson's. And then my next volume, it's about a third written right now, will be Contemporary Chiropractic Philosophy Volume 1, which is going to be about, if we wanted to say these same principles with all constraints off, they don't have to be Stevenson's same principles, what would we say? And I would say about 22 principles. As a matter of fact, I have that list of 22 principles, and I'm currently writing why say it that way instead of that way, what does that principle mean, and how does that explain it. The fact is, the initial assumption of the argument remains the same. Either we live in a conscious universe or we don't. Chiropractic believes we live in a conscious universe. The conclusion we come to is the same. Either subluxation is a significant phenomenon or it isn't. Chiropractic concludes that in a conscious universe, if subluxation interferes with the information being carried by nerve impulses from intelligence to matter, it trashes your health. But the argument we go through to get there is a little bit more streamlined, it's a little bit clearer, it takes into account more information than we had in 1927. It's a modern argument, and that's the topic of my second book. The third book in this whole series, which is going to be, it's in works because I'm thinking about it, but I'm not writing it yet, it's going to be, okay, how do we really apply chiropractic's philosophy to a practice? And then we're going to talk about things like, what's a straight objective practice, what's a practice that a wellness practice, what's a practice that focuses only on the subluxation, why should we do that, why shouldn't we do that, how do you apply this, what does this say about subluxation, what does this say about adjusting? That would be, chiropractic philosophy applied. And that's the series I'm working on right now, and I'm about a third of the way through the whole series, because I'm about a third of the way through the second book of this whole series. This is the first book.